is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
Indeed he does, and the Mayor of London is here to take your calls. And I would remind you at this point, this early juncture, that although the Mayor of London is in the studio, I would not confine contributions entirely to London-based questions. It would be daft to try in the current context, but equally there'll be plenty of time later in the programme to pick over the bones of Boris Johnson's ludicrous apology, so-called apology, in the House of Commons yesterday. So although that will almost certainly pop up, it will not be the main course of these conversations. I will begin, though, Mr. Mayor, by asking if you've ever attended a party without realising that you weren't attending a party.
No. Listen, I know there's a sort of jokey point to what you're saying, but this is a serious issue.
Of course.
I had members of my family who made huge sacrifices. Many Londoners made huge sacrifices. People across the country made huge sacrifices. And it's not just the arrogance of the Prime Minister, not just the hypocrisy, it's the blatant lying. It's the pattern of behaviour now we're seeing. This isn't one party or non-party, which is the defence, a ludicrous defence. But it's him asking us to make sacrifices, him changing rules, and then blatantly breaking the rules. And I'd remind your listeners, we have this Omicron variant. We're being asked to make sacrifices, wear a mask on the tube or in shops, work from home, and so forth. I know members of my family who have been in hospital recently, not being able to see the rest of the family because the hospital's following the rules, trying to keep us safe. And lo and behold, almost at the peak of this pandemic, the Prime Minister was blatantly breaking the rules and then lying about it. And I think the ship has sailed now for this non-apology yesterday. And I think members of the public now expect him to do the right thing, which will be exceptional for him, and resign.
Where does London stand with regard to Omicron?
Well, I've got some really good news for listeners. No complacency at all. But because of the huge sacrifices Londoners have made, because record numbers are getting the booster and the vaccine, we're seeing a reduction in the number of positive cases on a daily basis. We're seeing a reduction in the case rate in our city. We're seeing a reduction in admissions to hospital, and we're seeing a reduction in those on ventilators. But the case rate is still too high. Some other good news is if I was speaking to you this time last year, James, I'd be telling you that there are huge numbers in hospitals with COVID and with ventilators. That's still the case today, but thankfully fewer than this time last year. And I'd ask your listeners to continue to follow the rules. Wear a face mask when you can't keep your social distance. Speak to your friends, colleagues, neighbours, family. Have they had the booster? Have they had the vaccine? And let's try and do what we can so that when January the 26th comes, the data is sufficient to allow us to get out of Plan B.
I'm going to take the first question from the texts, actually, because it's brilliant. And then we'll hit the phone lines. It's unsigned, but it's just come in at 10:05. And it says, does Sadiq Khan think he could do a better job of leading the Labour Party than Sir Keir Starmer?
No. Keir Starmer is the leader of our party. I fully support him. I declare an interest.
In the way that Liz Truss is fully behind Boris Johnson, or in a slightly different way?
No, there's a difference. There's a number of differences. One is I genuinely like my leader, and secondly, I don't want his job. But look, I think you've seen over the last few weeks and months the difference Keir Starmer's made to our party. And I just remind the person who emailed in that when Keir Starmer became the leader of my party, our party, we'd just seen the biggest defeat our party has suffered for a number of decades. The way I compare it to a team you support being relegated and asking the new manager, the new captain, to not just get the team promotion, but to win the Premier League in one season. He's doing a great job, and the short answer is he's got my full support.
Have you watched Ted Lasso?
No, I haven't.
You'd enjoy it. It's right on your patch. A lot of it's set around Richmond and stuff like that. But the analogy would work even better if you'd seen Ted Lasso. Finally, before we go to the phones, 2 years till your next election. Do you guarantee you'll be fighting it?
I'm looking forward to fulfilling this term and then standing again for the
100%. Because you'd have to decide whether or not you're going to go back into the House of Commons around in the next 12 months, the next 6 months probably.
I love this job. It's the best job in politics, and we're going to deliver more. over the next 2.5 years. My intention is to continue to be the mayor of the greatest city in the world.
You'd be able to do more in a Labour cabinet than you would as a Labour mayor of London.
I'd be able to do more with a Labour government, with a Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, as the mayor of London. And so the idea of being the mayor of London when you've got a decent government who's not anti-London supporting me doing my job is really exciting. I've unfortunately over the last 5.5 years had Conservative governments who are anti-London. Just imagine what we could do with a pro-London Labour government with Keir Starmer as the Prime Minister.
What do you mean by anti-London?
Well, look at some of the policies. Look at the last spending review. Look at the last budget. Look at this phrase, levelling up. What it's meant is the government seeking to make our country more equal by making London poorer. You can see evidence of that in relation to cuts to Transport for London, in relation to the lack of investment in our housing, in relation to, over the last 11 years, record numbers of police officers being lost because of central government cuts, youth centres closing down and so forth. If we had a government that understood the way to make our country successful is to have a capital city flourishing and thriving, the way to make sure the country is more fairer is by supporting other parts of the country as well as London. I think we could not just be a more successful city, but contribute to our country being more successful as well.
To the phones.
The first caller, I hope, is David from Enfield. Good morning, David. Happy New Year.
Yes, good morning, Sadiq. Happy New Year to you. This is a question for you in your role as the London Police and Crime Commissioner. If the Sarah Everard vigil had been a bring-your-own-bottle gathering, would the Met have ignored it?
So, David, thanks for your question. I mean, I was on record at the time of expressing my unhappiness with the police, the way they policed that vigil in Clapham Common. It's well documented, the concerns I had in relation to the way they police that, not just in the context of what those women were campaigning about, and in the context of the awful way Sarah Everard had disappeared, and we now know what happened to Sarah. But actually, the reason why your question is so pertinent is because we now know those making the rules and lecturing us to follow the rules were blatantly breaking the rules, and they must have known, David. I mean, I fail to believe that the Prime Minister, that his right-hand men didn't know they were breaking the rules. And that's why, for those who were treated in their eyes badly on that day during the vigil, for them, the hypocrisy is what's so upsetting. And I think it is important that the Prime Minister understands the scale of the anger felt not just by those who supported the women at the vigil, but others across the country who couldn't do what they wanted to do because they were following the rules.
What did you think when it was revealed by the Metropolitan Police that they don't investigate retrospectively? That was the phrase used.
Yeah.
I know it's a bit nuanced. Obviously, if it was a murder, they'd be investigating retrospectively.
I will answer your question, but before I do, can I just explain that, David, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm in charge of the Met Police Service. What I don't do, for good constitutional reasons, but also because I think it's wrong, is direct the police who to investigate, who not to investigate, and tell them how to do an investigation. Why? Because, David, there are some people I don't like. There are some people who are my opponents. Just imagine if the police allowed themselves to be influenced by me. So I've got to be careful when I answer that question, James, not to give the impression that I'm telling the police who to investigate or that they should investigate Johnson or whatever. That being said, I think the problem is this in relation to how the police respond. If they don't respond in a way where the public has confidence the police will investigate without fear or favour, the public will lose confidence in the police, and we police by consent. And that's why it's so important, not just the Met Police Service, but all police forces across our country act and are seen to act in a way that's impartial. The reality is, over the weekend when I saw the email from one of the civil servants, you put that with the photograph that we've seen and put that with the various parties we now took place. I think those are a smoking gun.
Next call, I think, please.
The next call is... thank you for the call, by the way, David. The next call is also from a David. People who aren't called David can also ring.
This is true.
Speak to Sadiq. It's from Mill Hill, and it's another David. Good morning, David.
Good morning. I wish you a happy new year.
You too, mate.
I think you're insulting our intelligence by saying that London is congested because of your actions. You've made all closed lots of roads and you've created these bicycle lanes. How dare you insult us by saying, "Oh, London is congested"? It's your fault. You've done it. No one else has.
Well, let me just unpack some of the things you've said, David. So before the cycle lanes were introduced, I'm sure even you would agree that traffic wasn't free-flowing in our city, right? Do you accept that?
It was certainly free-flowing more than it is now.
Well, the evidence...
Isn't it? And what was it? And where did you get your figures that the pollution was reduced? I think that was a lie.
Well, there's these things called air quality monitors, David. What they do is they monitor the toxicity in the air, and they monitor the amount of nitrogen oxide, the amount of nitrogen dioxide, and the amount of particulate matter. But also, David, I've taken the time to speak to people like Rosamond Kissy Deborah, whose daughter Ella was 9 years old, and according to the coroner, her death, the air quality contributed towards her death. So what I'm looking at, David, are the air quality monitors and what they're telling us about the toxicity in the air. And I'm looking at the evidence, not just at the inquest, but what the coroner said as well. So that's my evidence in relation to the air in London being toxic. And my evidence in relation to congestion is because we've seen an increase in the numbers cycling across our city. So in outer London, an increase of more than 22%. In inner London, an increase of more than 7%. What we're seeing, though, are plummeting in relation to people using public transport and an increase in people using their cars. And the reality is, we as a city with narrow roads can't have 10 million people there or thereabouts jumping in their cars, because that does lead to congestion, which leads to a lack of productivity, but also poor air quality, bad for health, bad for business, and bad for the planet.
People feel safer. One moment, David. People feel safer in their cars during coronavirus, a lot safer.
And that's one of the reasons why I suspended the congestion charge, James, why I suspended some of the rules around ULEZ.
Another point David would make. That will have contributed to the number of cars on the road.
During the pandemic, but we brought back the congestion charge, and we've got a 24 hours a day ultra-low emission zone. And the good news is that's led to fewer people using the vehicles who come into central London. But across London, what we are seeing is massive congestion. And let me tell you what that congestion leads to. That congestion leads to, on average, somebody who drives regularly in a year being stuck in their car in traffic for almost 150 hours, more than 6 days, which leads to the loss of productivity to the sum of more than £5.1 billion. So if we want policies that are pro-business, pro-good health, and pro the environment, that means trying to encourage those that don't need their cars. I'm not talking about the plumbers or the electricians. I'm talking about those that don't need to be in their cars, having sensible alternative ways to get around our city. That could be walking, that could be cycling, that could be using public transport. And if they're going to use a vehicle, it should be a vehicle that doesn't contribute to, more carbon being emitted or toxicity.
David, do come back to the mayor, because I think I heard you a few weeks ago complaining to Nick Ferrari that you couldn't. So fill your boots.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I would say that what you're talking is just almost on the basis of rubbish. It's like a man kills both his parents and then ask the court to take into consideration he's an orphan when sentencing. I think you're
just
you're
try to be a little bit more on the issue, if you could.
You're off the wall.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're off the wall. Speak to taxi drivers. The whole of London is in gridlock because of your bicycle
Here's
lanes.
a text from a
Get rid of
taxi
them.
driver. Let me just read it out. Please ask Sadiq if he regrets reducing the hours of the congestion charge, and whether he directly links this to the recent increase in central London car journeys. If we are serious about reducing central London congestion and pollution, then private car journeys, Ubers and similar, all need to be reduced. This would also support the black cab industry and hopefully continue the transition to electric vehicles only in London.
Well, thanks for that message from the black taxi driver. I mean, the problem with his or her thesis is the hours of congestion charge haven't been reduced yet. And so the plan is to reduce them. It's always a problem when you knock over somebody's argument because of the evidence and the facts. But so the congestion charge changes will come in February. And what they're about, that person who's contacted us, is to balance the needs of the nighttime economy, our theatres, our restaurants and bars, who contribute hugely towards not just the vibrancy of our city, but tax revenues, but also trying to reduce congestion and improving the quality of the air. He's right, though, that we do need to make sure that we try and give preferential treatment to those that need our roads. So the black taxi driver will be really pleased that I'm the mayor that's allowed him and his colleagues, or her and her colleagues, to use our bus lanes, and our bus lanes are now reserved for our buses, throughout the course of the day and the evening, and black taxis can use those as well. He'll also be appreciative that I've increased the amount of cab ranks across our city, but also he's right, and that's what in relation to minicabs and congestion. What used to be the rule in London was, minicabs were excluded from paying the congestion charge, which led to the massive congestion where in London. They're now required to pay the congestion charge because we're going to reduce congestion in the heart of our city.
How much money is being raised via the ULEZ? Because I think people will be surprised that hasn't had an impact.
No, it's costing us. So basically, let me explain the ultra-low emission zone. This is a really important point you raise, because people assume that I want our cars to be cash cows. Not the case. So the purpose behind the ultra-low emission zone is to encourage good behaviour. And so if your vehicle is compliant, in other words, ULEZ compliant, you don't pay. If your vehicle, so we don't make any money. If your vehicle is non-compliant, because you're contributing towards the toxicity, you've got to pay. The polluter pays principle, you've got to pay £12.50 a day. And what we've seen is when I first announced this policy, only about 4 out of 10 cars were compliant. So when I first announced this policy in 2017, 60% would have had to pay the fee. Here's the great news. When we expanded the ultra-low emission zone in October up to the North Circular and South Circular, so it includes Central London and Inner London, more than 92% of vehicles were compliant. So more than 9 out of 10 vehicles were compliant. The great news is that means better quality air, which just knocks over David's point. But also it means less money coming in. We don't want money coming in. We want to clean the air in our city.
Put a date on it then. When can we sit here and say it's succeeded or it's failed? Your overall mission to reduce traffic levels in London, because they have gone back up again.
So the mission is to improve the quality of air in our London.
Yes. So what's the deadline? We've
already done that. So we've reduced the toxicity. So
it's the gridlock that you've been complaining about rather than the impact of the gridlock on the air, because I must have misread
They're linked.
That.
No, what it is, James, sorry, it's my fault for explaining. So there's two separate issues which are linked. Issue one is quality of air. And the ultra-low emission zone, encouraging people to walk and cycle, is one way of addressing that and use public transport. The second issue, which is linked, is congestion. So the more traffic there is, people stuck in their cars, it leads to poor quality air, but also leads to loss for businesses, because the cars that need to be moving around can't because of traffic. So they are linked. So we're going to continue to make progress on improving the quality of the air. I'm not satisfied yet. I'm hoping over the course of the next few months we'll see progress with the expansion of ULEZ, already seeing some really good progress. And I'm hoping we can do a decent deal with the government in relation to TfL finances, because what we need is an alternative to people using their cars, which is good public transport, but also more safe cycling and wider pavements.
And finally, to go back to David in Mill Hill's point, how because it's been an interesting era for science, the pandemic, hasn't it, with some relatively unfounded claims being given similar weight in some corners of the media to the best researched and best evidenced explanations. Your measures, the tools that you use, the monitors that are in place, I mean, are they objectively regarded as being definitive?
Yeah. So
I mean, part of me thinks you would say that, wouldn't you? Can you prove it?
So what Londoners should be proud of is we now have more air quality monitors than any city in the world. Why is that important? Because in real time we can see how good or bad the air is. So if you, for example, James, had hay fever, right? You see a weather forecast, know there's a high pollen count, and you could take action to avoid the stress, anxiety, awfulness of getting hay fever. Well, if you've got asthma or a respiratory issue, or you've got a child, you've got no idea of knowing how bad the air is. Well, you now do. You can register for our air quality alerts. You can go to the website and you can see how good or bad the air is, because we've got the air quality monitors, because this stuff is invisible. And we can now take action to avoid the situation where people have an exacerbation of their asthma and so forth, because we do need to clean up this air. It's one of the twin challenges we face: climate change and air quality.
Should we crack on?
Yep. Thanks for your call, by the way, David. The next caller is not David. It's Vidal from Streatham. Good morning.
Morning, Mayor. Now, we all know that we're much less likely to catch COVID in the outdoors than in enclosed spaces. And science says that to be COVID secure, ventilation is key to breaking up COVID aerosols much more than masks. Yet on public transport, especially the buses, TfL buses, there are no signs for opening windows, no announcements for keeping windows open, and there's no window jammers. But what you do have is lots of people, especially now it's gotten colder in the winter,
I know
getting
where
on
you're
the
going
bus.
with this, yes.
Yeah, they're getting on the bus. They are being compliant. They're wearing masks,
but they close the windows,
and yet they're closing the windows, even if the windows are open.
The plural of anecdote is not data, but I can confirm anecdotally Vidal's testimony on this. I witnessed it myself yesterday on a 272 for the record.
Well, Vidal, thanks for your question, and I will check the 272. They should the windows. There are window jammers in place in some of the buses, but clearly not in the ones that you and James have been on. Let me take that away, Vidal, because you're absolutely right, by the way. So what we've done, and I don't know if you remember this, Vidal, but I was on this show last summer, summer 2020, I beg your pardon, and a caller suggested this. It was an obvious idea, and we weren't doing it, and we introduced jammers to keep our windows open, because your explanation and the science behind what you're saying is spot on about ventilation. So the driver is sealed off from the rest of the passengers with the screen to protect the driver, but the rest of the bus should have windows open with the jammers. And when they go back to the garage, they're checked to make sure the windows are open, so they leave the garage with the windows open. And I suspect some of the jammers aren't there now. What jammers are basically asked to keep the windows open to stop people closing them in between. And also, I mean, I came by tube today to LBC. The tube in between carriages have their windows open as well. Vidal, can I take that away in relation to the point you've raised? Because it shouldn't be happening. They should be open. I know it's cold. And what I'm saying to listeners is, the inconvenience of being cold is a price worth paying for having a circulation of air on our buses.
Yeah. And I mean, we know that that's what's going to happen automatically. In summer, not so much, but that as soon as it gets cold, people just close
It's
windows.
a behavioural change, isn't it? It's almost reflex. People will be irresponsible people, and they'll often be a little bit older, perhaps, than average, and they just get on the train, on the bus, notice that the window's open and close it. So just take away the ability to close it, and you'll be golden.
Vidal, I promise you, I'll take this away right as soon as we finish this, and I'll speak to TfL to see what's gone wrong with your bus, and also the 272 as well.
We won't forget Rich has been in touch with the tweet. So today we really are talking about cycle lanes and e-scooters, which is, yes, but we're talking to the Mayor of London about it. We're not just all queuing up to bark at the moon. Let's crack on with the calls.
Vidal, thanks for your call. Next call is from Lewisham. Paul, good morning, Paul.
Hiya, Mr. Khan. Nice to speak to you.
You too.
Just a question. I'm not going to mention the company's name naturally at the moment. I work part-time for a company that's been serving the East End in the City of London since 1877.
Well, that narrows it down, Paul, surely, doesn't it?
Well, it will do a little bit, yeah. 1877, which I think is 145 years this year. Still family run, lovely company. Myself, I've never worked for a greater company. Very helpful. We are probably down to, I reckon now, 30 to 40% of our business at the moment that's still with us. I'm just wondering what the plans are to get the City of London back to some sort of normality, because we just can't carry on, I don't think, and it's a shame that companies been serving the city all these years, long before any of us were born, and looks like, something's done sooner or later that, we ain't going to be around. It's a shame, because it's still, the daughter and the son still run the company, going back 3 generations.
Let me add a question to this as well, while you answer Paul's. Whether you think things are going to go back to anything like normal? Because an awful lot of people, when we ever do it on the phones, they talk about having discovered that they can work flexibly. So the days of everybody piling into the city 5 days a week, and of course in some cases more, and never ever working from home, I wonder whether you think they're behind us now.
Look, Paul, thank you for your question. And I've met many businesses like the one you work for. Look, I'm all in favour of, adaptations, evolving, changing, but I think we've got to understand that cities like London are facing potentially an existential threat if footfall doesn't return to the centre of our cities. And Paul, you've given one example of it sounds like a great business struggling because of the lack of footfall in the centre of our city. That's why, of course, I'm in favour of adaptation, evolution, modernising, but we've got to recognise how important it is to the vibrancy of our city and also businesses to get people back to the centre. Not just Londoners, commuting back to the centre of our city to work, but also international tourists, visitors, students, and so forth. And that's why at the beginning of this show, I was able to give some good news in relation to the pandemic, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for January the 26th and Plan B being lifted, because people were starting to come back, Paul, last year. Not in the numbers we had before the pandemic, but we do need people coming back to the centre of our cities. And one of the biggest group of people missing are international tourists. I accept, by the way, what James is saying. The personal experience many people have is they can work from home and do their job and be as productive. But let me tell you this. We're missing out lots of things by people working from home. We're missing out on teamwork, on the creativity that comes from collaboration. New people starting their jobs aren't getting the mentorship and the support they need to flourish and thrive. You can learn by watching. But also, one of the reasons why many people are being as productive working from home is they're enjoying the fruits of people working close together before the pandemic. And what about the next generation? And so, look, I don't mind adaptations and people looking at new ways of working, but I think we've got to recognise that London's, Paris's, the New Yorks, the Hong Kongs, the reason why we are these global cities is because people come into the centre. And so, we've got a plan, Paul, working with colleagues across London, including the City of London, council leaders, businesses, sort of private sector, public sector, how we encourage a recovery for our city that's, of course, we don't want to go back to business as usual, but we've got to make sure we don't lose jobs, lose what's great about our city.
So say January 2019, what percentage of that traffic, footfall, call it what you will, into the square mile, do you think the new normal, that dreadful phrase, would involve?
Yes, we did some work and we think the footfall may not return until 2023. And for Paul's business, that's too far away. And so,
even then, it's not going to be 100% of what it was in 2019, is it?
We're not sure about how businesses will change. So, City of London being a good example. Yeah. They may decide to replace some of their office with residential or retail or leisure or so forth. And so, John Lewis, for example, I can mention them because they've gone public. John Lewis have said the future of John Lewis stores isn't just retail. There may be other things as well, leisure, so forth and so forth. And so we're going to work with businesses like yours about how we can get footfall back. We're looking at new ways of getting people back. But it's really important that we understand the importance of our city's success relying upon people coming to the heart of our city. And by the way, it's the same challenge facing New York, Paris, other cities across the globe as well. But thanks for raising that, Paul. The next caller is from Deptford. Dave. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for taking time to speak to
Pleasure.
me. It's taken me about 5 years to get in hold of you to ask you this question.
Better be good.
I'm actually a trade union member for the GMB, which I believe you're very well aware of. And my question is to you, will you commit to scrapping the congestion charge for emergency service workers in London when they're actually on duty or finishing duty?
So for which workers, Dave?
Emergency
I work as
service.
an ambulance driver. Emergency service workers, we have to pay that charge for the privilege to come into London if you're a member of the ambulance service, the fire brigade or the police, and we're not exempt from it. It's still a charge. Some of the employers actually are graceful enough to reimburse their staff members. However, that's public funds still being spent on something that doesn't have to be spent.
So do you mean the congestion charge or the ULEZ, Dave?
Congestion charge. I'm completely support the ULEZ, and I think it should be there. It should have been there a very long time ago. Because there's unsafe vehicles and vehicles that are very pollutive. But the congestion charge itself, we're there to do a service for London, but yet we have to pay for the privilege to come in. And to be fair, to some staff members, that's quite a lot of money. It does rack up. I appreciate, again, like I said, some of the employers do actually let you claim that as an expense. However, that is public money being spent on something that doesn't need to be, where it could be put to better use. Well,
listen, Dave, thank you for your call and for being an active trade unions and stuff. And you're right, I'm a member of the GMB, so I should declare that interest. So Dave, so firstly, we have got an arrangement with the Blue Light Services in relation to supporting them for policies around the ultra-low emission zone. The congestion charge, as you'll be aware, is a policy that began in 2003. Long before I became mayor 5 years ago. The congestion charge is a policy that I fully support, though, because what we're trying to do, as I said in answer to the previous question, is reduce the congestion in London for the reasons we know in relation to the consequences of both air quality and productivity. One of the reasons, by the way, Dave, why we consulted on reducing the hours of the congestion charge and a few other changes in relation to 7 days a week and so forth, was because not just supporting businesses, but supporting key workers who couldn't use public transport because of where they live, no alternatives and so forth. And so you'll be aware from February, the hours of the congestion charge will change from what they currently are, which is until 10 p.m. at night time, 7 days a week, to 6 p.m. in the evenings. And different hours on Saturday and Sunday from 12 to 6. And that will support key workers like the ones you're talking about, crucial for the running of our city. But But we do have to have a congestion charge. What we've seen, though, Dave, is as you said, many employers working with us in relation to supporting their workers. Well, I'm afraid we're not in a position to do, not least, by the way, because of the financial situation we have with TfL caused by the pandemic and the deal we're trying to do with the government. What we're not in a position to do is to allow all key workers exemption from the congestion charge.
That's all good and well, sir, but we do shift work. We work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So and I don't actually get the option to go, do you know what, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm on a night shift, I'm going to go home now because the congestion charge is coming in soon. I don't get to do that with my patients. I have to basically go, right, I have to work to the end of my shift, return to my base of operations, clock off, then go home. And 9 times out of 10, I am late off. So I do creep into congestion charge time, as do my colleagues. So I appreciate what you're saying, you're making amendments there, but we are still a valued service in London that people rely on day in, day out, whichever branch of the emergency service you work into. And we are there 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So I don't understand why, because I'm not asking to do it when I'm on my off days to drive into London and not have to pay. I appreciate I will have to pay congestion charge if I want to drive in London when I'm on a rest day. But when I'm working, if I'm 2 hours, 3 hours late off, which is quite common for my colleagues, why then am I stung with that charge on top of it? Because I still have to pay it. It's not like I can say, I'll
just give them all a waiver.
Do us a favour, pay that congestion charge for me because I'm a bit skint coming towards the end of the month. I have to pay it first, then claim it back. So I'm still incurring a cost. So, I mean, I've been asking for 5 years to speak to you about this, Mr. Mayor, and I gave up last year. Well, before the pandemic.
Point of order, Dave. You clearly didn't because you're here, and I'm glad you are because I think this is a really powerful and important point.
Dave, I'm afraid I can't give you good news in relation to waiving for all those who work in, critical jobs, the congestion charge. What I can do is continue to work with employers like yours to make sure they do support workers who really do need to use their cars for reasons that are understandable, because the alternative in relation to public transport, whether it's the night bus or the night tube, isn't there. What we simply can't do, and I simply can't afford it, and nor could TfL, the CFO of TfL, is afford to give a waiver to everyone who works in a key worker job in London. But we are from February changing the hours of the congestion charge, and you'll see many more people like you being exempt from paying this. And by the way, I'm being criticised the other way from people who are saying we should have a congestion charge, 12 hours a day minimum, but 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, to try and reduce the amount of cars coming into the centre of our city.
Dave, just a word, given that you've waited so long to put this to the Mayor, a word for my listeners on why you think you should get one, and because obviously you'll understand once that is agreed to, then teachers perhaps would start calling for one, and non-emergency workers in the health service, and all key, let's just confine it to key workers, but there'll be lowly paid people stacking supermarket shelves who would feel that they should get it as well.
But buses and taxi drivers still get to drive in a bus lane and taxi lane that I don't get to drive in.
No, I didn't ask about that. I asked what just to say for my listeners why you think you, because I'm minded to agree with you, but as soon as I started saying to the Mayor, why not just give them a waiver, I found myself wondering, well, who else deserves one? Why do you think it should be confined to emergency workers?
Because the service that we do in London and the restrictions we have on travel. I mean, I live near Brands Hatch, so I have to drive in there to central London every day. I can't afford to live where I work.
Yeah.
And that's a fact for everyone that works pretty much in emergency service in London.
And also for a lot of people in other cities. I'm not having a go. I'm just wondering.
We do not work where we live anymore.
No.
That's a fact of life. Everyone has to travel in. And don't get me wrong, I've chosen to do this career, and it's a career that I love. And I appreciate that I brought this issue onto myself. However, I feel it's a responsibility to sort of raise, can we make this a non-issue anymore? Yes, we can. Because I don't think, last year people outside clapping their hands saying thank you to me. Yet I'll go and ask everyone, do you think I should have to take congestion charge to come in and do the job that I'm doing? I've just helped your mum, just helped your dad. No, I guarantee that will be the answer to it. No.
Of course.
And I appreciate what you're saying. Oh, these people ask, these people ask. Yeah, they will ask. We'll discuss it. Do they need it? Possibly yes or no. That's an issue that you have to discuss with that group of staff. What I'm saying is, it's a lot of money, especially on my side of the emergency services, which, do you remember the percentage pay rise that they gave the NHS staff this year? It wasn't great.
I believe the technical term was buttons.
the cost of living has absorbed that 10 times over already.
And this would be a way. This would be a way of help. I'm sorry that the news is not good.
I've obviously got it may seem like your representation have fallen on deaf ears, but I've got a great respect for the work you do, care workers, ancillary workers, police officers, British Transport Police, City of London Police, cleaners, porters, radiologists, firefighters, nurses, doctors, ambulance workers, bus drivers. I could go on. We have reached a deal with some employers where they reimburse their employees where it really is essential. There's no alternatives. But the point that James O'Brien is trying to make is, we have a congestion charge. We're the only city with a congestion charge. I recognise the challenges it brings. We are a capital city with massive issues around congestion. The congestion charge has been here since 2003. I support it. From next month, we're changing the hours to support more people like you, to support our economy, at the same time addressing the issues of congestion and air quality. But I'm really sorry you've had to wait 5 years, and I'm really sorry I can't give you better news.
Dave, thank you. I'm sorry it's taken you so long to get that question on the board. On the subject of money, Gary Burton's been in touch to say, can Sadiq Khan confirm that he pays for his own decorating at home? And I can add, because I know Gary, that he'll be happy to give you a quote if you do.
Gary, I do. I haven't just gone through the painful experience of repainting one of our rooms. It's not a good experience when you are an ordinary Joe like you and I are. But by the way, it goes to another issue, Gary, that I referred to. Again, I know your tongue is firm in your cheek, as James was at the beginning of the show. But actually, these are serious issues, Gary. Because just pause and think about this. If somebody is lending or giving the Prime Minister money towards redoing their property, don't tell me that isn't a favour that will be cashed in later on. And this idea that politicians, you can get influence with politicians by giving them a loan or paying for their flat is a really pernicious one, even if it's the case that Johnson doesn't do anything in return, whether it's fulfilling his wish to organise an exhibition or whatever. It's the perception that is so dangerous, Gary. And this is my point about this Prime Minister. This Prime Minister is now shown to be not just really, really arrogant, not just a hypocrite. We know now contracts were given to mates of the Tory party, the court cases that have been brought, which have shown this, the so-called VIP lane. But also we know that our Prime Minister is a liar. And it's for those reasons, Gary, I say, and it pains me as somebody who's a patriot, who believes in the power of politics to bring about change and believes most politicians, Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, SNP, Green, become politicians because they believe in public services, that this Prime Minister is a disgrace to my profession and he should quit.
But three things briefly, if you would. And the first just occurred to me then. When Dawn Butler called Boris Johnson a liar in the House of Commons, it rather split opinion on whether that was the correct tactic. Keir Starmer broke the seal yesterday by using the word, but in the context of many people are saying. Are you with or against Dawn Butler's approach on that? Very briefly, because I want to get through two more questions. I
made a rule when I became mates with Dawn in 2004 never to disagree with her. So Dawn's always right.
Such a cop-out. 10:41 is the time. The cannabis pilot, it's got misreported, so I stress again briefly, but tell us exactly what is happening and whether or not you are pressing ahead with it. So, listen, we're going to try new policies trying to address the issue of violence in our city, but also the idea of young Londoners being, having a criminal conviction and a blight against their name and being affected for the rest of their life. So what this is parts of our country, from West Midlands to Durham, from Thames Valley to Avon and Somerset, have tried a pilot to divert away from the criminal justice system those young people caught with a very small amount of cannabis to try and address their issues around drugs, to avoid them having a criminal conviction. So the Mayor's office are looking into this. No recommendations come to me, not been signed off by me, but I won't apologise for trying new things to address the issue of violence in our city. But also, one of the things that, James, I know speaking to young Londoners is, once you've got a criminal conviction, life is much more harder. And if we can divert people away from a conviction, from being a habitual offender, I'll look into that. And let's wait and see what the recommendation is to me, and let's wait and see what I decide. And finally, just before we came on air, actually, you called on the government to create a temporary visa scheme for construction workers. Why do you think London needs that? Look, one of the biggest challenges, and actually this is referred to by Dave when he was ringing in about him working in the NHS but having to travel in from Brands Hatch, is we need far more genuinely affordable homes in London for people like Dave to live in London.
Right. But let me share the bad news. Despite us having record amounts of homes being started over the last 5 years and completed, council homes and other genuinely affordable homes, the bad news is we now have record numbers of vacancies amongst construction workers, the biggest number of vacancies at any time over the last 20 years, clearly made worse by brilliant construction workers going back to country of origin from the EU. What I'm saying to the government is, look, we're accelerating training up Brits to be construction workers. We have in London the Mayor's Construction Academy training up Londoners to be construction workers. But in the meantime, we've got massive vacancies. We can't build the homes we need. So have a temporary COVID visa for construction workers. You've done it for lorry drivers. You've done it for poultry workers. Do it again, please, for construction workers, because we need these builders to build the homes we desperately need.
That will do it for the first Speak to Sadiq of the year, I think. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you. And happy birthday, James. I'm told by your team that I am your birthday present. So,
so as long as you don't jump out of a cake.
Those listeners listening, there's two things James asked for on his birthday. One is he wants his team to beat West Ham in the FA Cup. I'm not sure that his team could promise that. They have promised him, though, the Mayor of London doing Speak to Sadiq on his show. Happy birthday, James.
Oh, gosh. Oh, what an embarrassment of riches. Many thanks indeed. And we will be returning to similar territory in about a month. The time now is 10:45.
This is LBC. Well,